Please repeat after me. Tapasvina, the great learned sages. Dhanapada, the great performer of charity. Yasasvina, the great worker of distinction. Manushvina, the great philosophers or mystics. Mantravidha, the great chanter of the Vedic hymns. Sumangala, strict followers of Vedic principles. Shemam, fruitful result. Na, never. Vidanti, attain. Vina, without. Yad arpanam, dedication. Tasmai, unto him. Subhadra, auspicious. Shravase, hearing about him. Namaha, my obeisances. Namaha, again and again. Translation. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the all-auspicious Lord Sri Krishna again and again, because the learned sages, the great performers of charity, the great workers of distinction, the great philosophers and mystics, the great chanters of the Vedic hymns, and the great followers of Vedic principles cannot achieve any fruitful result without dedication of such great qualities to the service of the Lord. Please repeat after me. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the all-auspicious Lord Sri Krishna again and again, because the great learned sages, the great performers of charity, the great workers of distinction, the great philosophers and mystics, the great chanters of the Vedic hymns, and the great followers of Vedic principles cannot achieve any fruitful result without dedication of such great qualities to the service of the Lord. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Purport. Advancement of learning, a charitable disposition, political, social or religious leadership of human society, philosophical speculations, the practice of the yoga system, expertise in the Vedic rituals, and all similar high qualities in man serve one in the attainment of perfection only when they are employed in the service of the Lord. Without such dovetailing, all such qualities become sources of trouble for people in general. Everything can be utilized either for one's own sense gratification or in the service of one other than oneself. There are two kinds of self-interest also, namely personal selfishness and extended selfishness. But there is no qualitative difference between personal and extended selfishness. Theft for personal interest or for the family interest is of the same quality, namely criminal. A thief pleading not guilty because of committing theft, not for personal interest, but for the interest of society or country, has never been excused by the established law of any country. People in general have no knowledge that the self-interest of a living being attains perfection only when such an interest coincides with the interest of the Lord. For example, what is the interest of maintaining body and soul together? One earns money for maintenance of the body, personal or social, but unless there is God consciousness, unless the body is being properly maintained to realize one's relationship with God, all good efforts to maintain body and soul together are similar to the attempts of the animals to maintain body and soul together. The purpose of maintaining the human body is different from that of the animals. Similarly, advancement of learning, economic development, philosophical research, study in the Vedic literature, or even the execution of pious activities like charity, opening hospitals, and the distribution of food grains, should be done in relation with the Lord. The aim of all such acts and endeavours must be the pleasure of the Lord and not the satisfaction of any other identity, individual or collective. Samsiddhir Hari Toshanam. In the Bhagavad Gita 9:27, the same principle is confirmed, where it is said that whatever we may give in charity and whatever we may observe in austerity must be given over to the Lord or be done on his account only. The expert leaders of a godless human civilization cannot bring about a fruitful result in all their different attempts at educational advancement or economic development unless they are God-conscious. And to become God-conscious, one has to hear about the all-auspicious Lord, as he is described in literature like the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So this whole chapter, the cosmic manifestation, Maharaj Parikshit is inquiring from Shukadev Goswami about the creation. But Shukadev Goswami, you can see in all of the preceding verses and the verses that we're coming up to, what's he doing? He's offering his obeisances and his most respectful obeisances, and he's offering all of his beautiful poetic words in glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he acknowledges that everything is under the control of the Lord, and that the Lord is the origin of everything. And yesterday in Ramai Maharaj's class, he was pointing out how no one likes to bow down. And it's so true. But these great illustrious sages like Shukadev Goswami, what's he doing? He's prostrating himself, he's humbly offering his respectful obeisances. And when you read Chaitanya Charitamrita, you can see how Krishnadas Kaviraj, he's really begging for the mercy of the Lord so he can describe the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. He doesn't give himself any airs and graces or any, superlative qualifications, but he's humbly praying for the mercy of the Lord. So in a like-minded mood, I'm humbly praying for the mercy of the Vaishnavas. I'm going to speak a little bit about what Prabhupada has talked here. So, it's interesting in the material world that when one is humble, they see it as a sign of weakness. And it takes them some time to understand that someone who is a humble person is actually decorated with all good qualities, because they're not used to it. It's a big adjustment for them to, come to that understanding. Because in the material world, particularly one can say in the professional realm, they're always jockeying for the better position. Always got to prove that someone's better than they are, or someone's made a mistake and they haven't made the mistake. And it was always very interesting, when we'd have work meetings, etc., and if there was, a mistake made, they'd always be very astounded, because they'd say, "Oh yes, I'm sorry, I made that mistake," because they were so used to everyone just shifting the blame to someone else, so they get quite surprised. So Shukadev's prayers in glorification of the Lord help us understand that whatever qualities or abilities we have to assist another person, it also has its source in Krishna. These abilities, they're not our own. We can't claim ownership. Oh, I'm so intelligent, or I'm so creative, or, I've got all of these initiatives that I'm going to, show the world. No, we can't, or even try and help the world. We might have altruistic motives, but we have to understand that what is the source of any perceived talent we may have, any perceived intelligence we may have. It's Krishna. In fact, we can't even blink our eyelids without the grace of the demigod who's in charge of the eyelids. We're also very, proud of how we can control ourselves. But actually, if the demigod in charge of one of our limbs decided to go on strike, there was nothing we could do about it. So, as devotees, we have a little bit more understanding that Krishna is the source of our abilities. And as we spend time in Krishna consciousness, as we become purified, we realise more and more that actually we're nothing except by the grace of the Lord and by the grace of Srila Prabhupada. And we desire and we pray daily, sometimes more than, almost constantly. Please Prabhupada, please Krishna, please Radharani, I'm a worthless sod. Please just give me some strength, give me some spiritual strength so I can help Prabhupada in his mission. So that's the prayer of the devotees. And Krishna is, as I said, he's the intelligence in man. And in Bhagavatam it describes that Krishna induces devotional service and he sanctions devotional service. So it's very, very interesting, that whole concept. We think that we're the doer. We think, oh, I can do this service, I can do that. But actually, unless Krishna encourages us and inspires us, we don't have that intelligence. And unless Krishna decides to agree to us serving in that way, unless he sanctions it, then nothing will be successful. So at every step we can see that Krishna, just like Sukadeva Goswami is establishing here, that Krishna is the centre of everything. And without his blessings, nothing will happen. And Prabhupada points out in that purport how, despite all the educational developments, despite all of the attempts to try and create peace and harmony in the world, and we can see with, the pandemic, how it's really shown up. There's not much, not much collaboration in the world with all different, agendas going on. That without that understanding that Krishna is the centre, it's not going to be successful. Nothing will be successful. So this verse is mentioning that it's not just materialists who are great workers of distinction and great philosophers throughout history, but also the great brahmanas. They're engaged in reading Vedic hymns and the great sages. So even for those more elevated personalities, when they don't have that focus on Krishna, what they're doing is also not very relevant. And I was listening to a lecture as I was getting ready for Mangalarti this morning, and Prabhupada's talking about the Jnana Karma and Karma Kanda. And he was saying that with Karma Kanda, that, there can be mistakes made in all these wonderful sacrifices and giving in charity. And he narrated the story of a king who decided to give lots of cows in charity to a group of brahmanas. So he gave, 100 cows to that one, 100 cows to that one, and he was feeling, I'm feeling satisfied, I've served the brahmanas. And then by a mistake, one of the brahmanas took another cow belonging to a different brahmana, and that brahmana was furious. This brahmana's taken my cow. And he had like 120 cows anyway. And so he went to the king and complained. He said, he's taken my cow. I want my cow back. This is outrageous. And then the king said, oh, don't worry. I'll give you 10 cows to replace that one cow. But the brahmana wasn't satisfied. And in the style that sometimes brahmanas invoke, he cursed the king. I curse you! Pulled out his Brahman dead. I curse you to be born as a lizard in your next life. So Prabhupada was pointing out that even with these wonderful, bestowing of charity, the yajnas, mistakes can happen and you can suffer for those mistakes. And the same with jnana karma. That Prabhupada describes can be so speculative. They're just acquiring knowledge and they don't have the correct focus. So, and Prabhupada's talking in that purport that they can't achieve any real fruitful results, any long-lasting, real sustaining results without dedicating those qualities to the Lord's service. And it's a bit like claiming that, you've been commissioned to build a cabinet and you've been provided the nails. Prabhupada uses a similar example often. You're provided with the nails, you're provided with the wood, you're provided with the design, and all you have to do is put it together as the instrument. And when you've completed the cabinet, what do you say? You go, it's my cabinet. It belongs to me. And we're doing this all the time in this material world. That, Krishna's providing all of these wonderful things for us to use, but using them in our own service or the service of our family or in the service of humanity, it's actually not really using it properly. And Prabhupada uses the example here that We're dovetailing. It's kind of something that when we come to Krishna consciousness, we dovetail everything. Sure, Andika, you would remember that. You know, that's dovetail all your skills in the service of Krishna. Because a devotee understands that he's an instrument and that whatever we do is meant to be a service for Krishna. And Prabhupada cites 927, where Krishna says, "A son of Kunti, all that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer and give away, as well as all austerities that you perform, should be done as an offering to me." So when we do that, when we place Krishna as the centre, he's the pivot, that's when there's success. And throughout this whole purport, Prabhupada's elaborating on this point, keeping Krishna as the centre of our actions. And it doesn't mean that, okay, it means we stop any other activity and we just come and we worship the deity in the temple. It's a matter of shifting the consciousness so that whatever we're doing in the service of Krishna, whether it's by offering the result to Krishna, whether it's the meditation on Krishna, that Krishna, you're allowing me to do this. Thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. Thank you for inducing me, and thank you for sanctioning, our services. So, and one of the main focuses, as I said, was about this dovetailing. And Prabhupada used the term very often. And actually, I'd never heard that term before I came to Krishna consciousness. I was a relatively fairly educated person, but I'd never heard the term dovetailing. So I looked it up to see what the Oracle says, Mr. Google, see what Mr. Google says. And the first thing that came up, that in computer science, there's an algorithm, and that dovetailing in that sense, it's a technique that interweaves different computations, performing them essentially simultaneously. So they're taking all of these different computations and they're performing simultaneously all together. And then of course the term is used in carpentry, and it's a particular type of joint that joins two things together. It's a dovetail. And the Cambridge Dictionary, it defines dovetailing as to cause something to fit exactly together, which those definitions really work very nicely with Prabhupada's explanation of dovetailing, is that we can use everything, fitting it all very nicely together in Krishna's service. So we marry those actions, our talents, our propensities, together, they fit exactly together. So there's pretty much any talent that we have or any propensity that we have, we can use in Krishna's service. The writer, he writes poetry, or he writes books to bring people to Krishna consciousness. The artist, of course, pretty clear, he can paint beautiful pictures of Krishna. We can make things for Krishna, we can, use our intellect. The scientists, devotee scientists, what do? They write these wonderful books proving that life comes from life. And Prabhupada was actually very supportive of our devotee scientists. He wanted them to get out there and convince the scientists that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's clear in this purport that without dovetailing, no matter what quality we may possess, will end up causing us trouble if we don't use it properly, as Prabhupada describes. And that's because these activities or our talents will be subject to our mental speculation. And our minds can take us all over the place. We can be influenced not only by that, but the tides of emotion. I like doing this one day, the next day I don't like it. One minute I do this, the other minute I do that. And our mind's very limited perspectives. So Prabhupada's pointing out that we can use everything for our own sense gratification or for the service of someone else, but qualitatively there's no real difference. So the altruist, he may not be thinking of himself or herself. They may be wanting to give in charity, but if in some way or other, even that giving in charity is, to a degree, a sense gratification, because you derive some pleasure. Oh, I'm such a good person. I've done my good deed for the day. Or I've given in charity to someone else. That's very good. I feel good when I help other people. So we want to rise to the platform where it doesn't matter what we feel, but we have our duties, we have our actions that Srila Prabhupada has prescribed to us, and we follow those very carefully. So I may give in charity to a good cause, but if that good cause isn't connected to the absolute truth or a Krishna conscious activity, it does exist in the realm of this extended sense gratification. And because we receive, as I said, some good feeling when we've done that, that good deed. I know I do. I feel, oh, that's good. I've done my good deed for the day. I helped the old lady across the street. In a subtle way, we are opening ourselves up also to accepting the karmic reaction when we give money away, for instance, to the wrong person at the wrong time, in the wrong mood. And in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 17, verses 20, 21 and 22, Krishna gives a whole explanation about that giving in charity. So charity given out of duty, without expectation of return, at the proper time and place, and to a worthy person, is considered to be in the mode of goodness. And I just want to read out the little purport that Prabhupada gives in explanation of this verse. In the Vedic literature, charity given to a person engaged in spiritual activities is recommended. There is no recommendation for giving charity indiscriminately. Spiritual perfection is always a consideration. Therefore, charity is recommended to be given at a place of pilgrimage, and at lunar or solar eclipses, or at the end of the month, or to a qualified Brahmin or a Vaishnava, or in temples. Such charities should be given without any consideration of return. Charity to the poor is sometimes given out of compassion, but if a poor man is not worth giving charity to, then there is no spiritual advancement. In other words, indiscriminate charity is not recommended in the Vedic literature. And in the following two verses, it goes on to say about the giving in charity in the mode of passion. The charity performed with the expectation of some return, or with a desire for furtive results, or in a grudging mood, is said to be charity in the mode of passion. And then charity in the mode of in ignorance, is that performed at an impure place, at an improper time, to unworthy persons, or without proper attention and respect. I found that very interesting, that without proper attention and respect. So if you do see someone who really desperately needs help, and you kind of fling some coins at them, one needs to do something like that with proper attention and respect. So these strictures about how we give in charity, they're very important, but it doesn't mean that we become hard-hearted and we go, oh no, I can't give to that person because they're just going to use that money to buy a coffee, or I don't know what they're going to do with that money. But there may be some very desperate people who genuinely really need some help. And a devotee is very soft-hearted. They're not hard-hearted. And there was a very, very nice pastime of Srila Prabhupada's that Vishaka Prabhu writes in her book, 5 years and 11 months and a lifetime of unexpected love. Has anyone read that book? If you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you read it. It's wonderful, wonderful pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. Vishaka spent a long time, she was Prabhupada's kind of official photographer, she was a BBT official photographer. She travelled with Srila Prabhupada, she had a lot of association with Srila Prabhupada, and her book is very wonderful, so I believe it's available in the shop, so please do read it, it's worth it, it's wonderful. So this is what Vishaka writes in her book about this charity and about not being hard-hearted. So one morning after a walk along the beachfront in Bombay, I was sitting behind Prabhupada in our ambassador. The ambassador is a particular type of car that was only available in India. And they were very, very long-lasting cars. Prabhupada had a few ambassadors, or we had a few ambassadors in India. He was waiting for Shamashunda to drive us home when a beggar holding a messy baby and flanked by two messy children came up to Prabhupada's car window with her hand outstretched, asking for money. Prabhupada turned to the three of us in the back seat and requested some paisa, that's just a few cents in Indian currency, then rolled down his window and Prabhupada personally, he gave the woman the coins that we'd given him. I was surprised, Vishaka writes. I'd been studying chapter 17 in the Bhagavad Gita, which is those verses I just read out, where Krishna says that indiscriminate charity that given to persons who can spend it on intoxicants, for example, is not beneficial. After the woman left, I sat for a few minutes with that scriptural thought lodged in my mind, then gathered my courage and said to Srila Prabhupada, why do we give Krishna's money to beggars? Prabhupada was silent. I don't know if anyone who's lived in India have seen this. And when I read this pastime, I felt so guilty because there's been so many times I've been sitting in a taxi or in the car and some poor beggar lady will come up with lots of children around her and asking for money, and I haven't given anything because I thought, it's it's money to an improper person at an improper time. So I've declined to give in charity. But when I read this, I just felt so bad that I could have at least done something, particularly if it's, a woman with children. So Prabhupada was silent, Vishaka writes. Perhaps he hadn't heard me as I was sitting behind him, or had I offended him? More moments passed and he didn't speak. Is the money prasadam? I said, thinking that money coming from Prabhupada was actually coming first from Krishna. Yes, was all he said. And Vishaka writes, what could be more natural than a kind-hearted person with means giving to someone without means, especially if children were involved? Why was I darkening this simple exchange with dogma? I saw that I had been learning about Krishna by rote, going through religious rituals and routines without even common sense. What to speak of affection for God and his creation. Later I read that Prabhupada's Guru Maharaj told his householder disciples to give to beggars. Otherwise their hearts would become hard. They would lack compassion. Yes, I thought, Prabhupada was teaching me the same thing in the car that morning. And I thought that was such a fantastic pastime. And then there's another very funny story about a beggar that I heard recently that I'd like to share. And this beggar in a small town, he came across this very magnificent mansion. So he thought, I'm going to park myself out the front of this mansion, and when the landlord, the babu comes out, I'm going to ask him for some charity. So he sat there, and the owner came out of this lovely house, and he said, "Oh, sir, I've never seen such a beautiful suit in the whole town. You look so dapper, best looking fellow in town." And the babu calls out, "Dear wife, please bring me down that gold chain sitting on the dresser." And the beggar's thinking, I'm onto a good thing here. He goes, "Oh, sir, this garden in front of your house, it's immaculate. It would beat Costa's garden any day. It's wonderful." And then the milkman calls out, "Oh, darling wife, can you bring me down that heavy gold bracelet that's sitting beside the gold chain?" And the beggar's thinking, "Wow, this is making my life. I can retire now." And then very excited, the beggar said, and the man's now getting into his car, he's warming up the car, he's got his briefcase in the back of the car. And the beggar says, "That's the best car in town. The heavy bracelet, what happened to the $1,000 that you called your wife to bring down?" And he says, See, you please me so much with your sweet words. So didn't I please you with my sweet words? And he just drove off. Which I thought was quite an hilarious thing. So it's the power of words. And words are very, very important. We need to use them very, very carefully. So Prabhupada's stressing this dovetailing in Krishna consciousness. So no matter what endeavours we make, if God or Krishna is not at the centre, then ultimately our efforts will not meet with everlasting success. So when we see someone who needs some charity, we can think, okay, this is Krishna's sitting there in their heart, that after all they are the children of Krishna, just like I'm the children of Krishna, a child of Krishna. We don't have this self-entitlement that I'm a devotee, they're not a devotee. We're at one stage, we're all not devotees. And by the mercy of a Vaishnava, by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, we've been given this great opportunity. And Rukmini, my god sister Rukmini, told me this wonderful story where I think it was in New Vrindavan, and there was a young bhakta who was meant to be in charge of, looking after Prabhupada in the evening, just, as a bodyguard, make sure that everything was okay. And it started to rain, so he went into like the shed or the garage near where Prabhupada was staying. So he was waiting there and he suddenly felt like there was someone there, and he turned around and there's Srila Prabhupada standing there. And he said to Srila Prabhupada, he offered his obeisances and said to Srila Prabhupada, is there anything I can help you with, Prabhupada? And Prabhupada said, I want you to go where I cannot go. And this bhakta's thinking, wants me to go where he can't go? But he goes everywhere. He goes to Paris, France, Africa, he goes everywhere. Prabhupada said, I want you to go where I cannot go. And I want you to show the people how much Krishna loves them by how much you love them. And Rukmini was explaining, Prabhupada's talking about the future. Prabhupada wasn't going into the future. He was in an elderly body, and this was a young bhakta. So Prabhupada was instructing that devotee to show people how much Krishna loves them by how you treat them. So it's so important that we don't confine our good manners or our affection just to each other, but we also show that respect and love for all living entities. And that's very pleasing to Srila Prabhupada and Krishna. So when we do keep Krishna's service, either direct or indirect, then we are eternally successful. So I'll end here. If there's any comments, feedback. Is there a microphone for Mother Ambika?
Thank you very much for those insights. Nice class. That story about Sri Krishnarupa was that he was going by train somewhere with a lot of his disciples, and how the beggars come through the train so some beggars came through the train, and all of those none gave him money, and they think, what's he going to use it for? And then Sri Krishnarupa said, the beggars anything? What is this? He was really upset with his disciples, so from then on, they knew we have to be sort of have that natural compassion. And the other thing I was going to ask is, in 1973, we had this, we had this ballet performance, because when this devotee, Prabhupada called Nataraj, he defected from the Russian ballet when he came to Australia, and he joined the temple. So we also had Mehta, who was a ballet dancer by profession. So they had done this really incredible sort of drama about the living entity coming to the material world, and it was performed by the actors. So they were doing ballet dancing to perform this, and Srila Prabhupada was there. Srila Prabhupada saw that play, Anyway, so they asked him about it and he didn't say much. And then afterwards he said, well, actually, you should be doing Leela, not just these plays. So I'm just wondering, how you say that we dovetail everything. So it seems that, that also is with some conditions, like you've got people who do modern art or modern dancing and stuff. So how do they sort of dovetail those things in a way that's going to be that's going to please Prabhupada and please Krishna, like they'll be thinking that they're dovetailing because they've got their skill and they're using it for Krishna, but actually there's other stipulations too. I'm just wondering how that can be ensured that it's done properly.
Thank you, Ambigrupu. That's a really good point. Actually, just before I try and answer that, there was a play that what was the name of that group of actors that would go around? Yes, Vaikuntha Players. And I was in Mayapur, and they would put on a play. Sudama Maharaj was there, and Rasagya, one of some of our great actors, yeah. And they put on a play about Kali, and she was dressed up like a very glamorous woman, and Sudama had a top hat, and Prabhupada laughed. He loved it, because we were all watching Prabhupada watch the play, and he really enjoyed it. So I don't know what specifically was about that he didn't like. But in answer to your question, I would proffer that one does these things under the guidance of the authorities. So I'm not saying that those particular people weren't following, the temple presidents, etc. But because, we need to just make sure that there is we've got the proper focus, and the focus isn't on the necessarily on the beauty of the performers, but on the message of the performers. So, but I think if something's done, and we used to put on the most, well, I didn't put them on, I've watched them, hilarious plays that were certainly not, particularly in Australia. They were very hilarious. Ramai Maharaj may have been one of the actors in some of those plays. They were very funny. But yes, I think just, keeping that right consciousness and going under the auspices of the temple authority. That's how I would posit an answer for that one. Any other comments, corrections? Anasuya?
Very well, thanks for class. What you were talking reminded me of the pastime in Chaitanya Bhagavat when Lord Chaitanya is getting married to Priya, is it? And then at the wedding ceremony, then tradition to give the gifts to all the brahmanas, and because the Lord knows what's in everyone's heart, then he preempts that the brahmanas are going to even have a thought of being greedy, that they will want more gifts than what the Lord is giving. So instead then he provides extra gifts to prevent them from committing the offense of being greedy and wanting more gifts. And I was struck always when I hear that happen, that even in those times, in the presence of Lord Chaitanya, there's still can be elements of greed, or maybe it was like to show their devotion as well, but it's just like what to speak of us.
Thank you, Anasuya. It's very nice. Anything else? Okay. Oh, yes. Could you come a little closer? I can see you, but
in terms of like what you were saying about the beggar coming to your car and you saying no originally and then feeling bad. In terms of effective altruism, is it ever good to assess like what's more worthy? Like does that question valid when it comes to altruism? It almost seems like it takes away from the beauty of the kind of deed to think of something that could be more worthy. And then in terms of what you were saying about It's like when you do it with the goodness, it's like the intention that you give, because you said, you don't just throw the coins, you give them, and that's on the giving side. It makes you feel good that you did it in the right way, but really, a lot of the goodness comes from what they do on the other side with what you gave them in order for that donation to be effective. Does that question make sense?
Yes, I mean, they're good points. So the first point about, you were saying about determining who's worthy, who's not worthy, it's a little subjective. Because, you know, I mean, if someone's busking in the street and they've got a packet of cigarettes there and, you know, they've got a McDonald's wrapper sitting right next to them, I may be a little disinclined to give, because I'm thinking, well, I know that they're going to smoke cigarettes and eat meat. But if it's, you know, like a beggar lady in the street who has children with her, obviously she's in a very vulnerable position, then you could ascertain, well, okay, you know, this is probably going to go to feed her children. So yes, there is a bit of subjectivity and a little bit of discrimination there, but sometimes that's, you know, that's something that you have to do. And what was your second question? Sorry,
about in those two examples that you just gave, the intent with which you give to both of them could be the same, but the outcome that they do with the goodness that you gave could be vastly different. Which I don't like when you're thinking about giving in order to be effective with the goodness that you give. I don't have to word the question. Because obviously you're going to get something out of giving.
Well, the ideal thing is you don't give with a view of getting something back. So that notion of, and Prabhupada explains in that purport that it's actually selfish, whether it's selfish when you're just concerned about yourself, or even there's an element of collective selfishness when you're giving to others. The idea is not that you want to get anything in return. So even when a person will give in charity, the altruistic, Prabhupada's pointing out, and it's something I was trying to explain in the class, that there is still that element of sense gratification there, that, oh yeah, I feel good because I did this. The ultimate thing is only to do it out of love and not do it to get something back. So for example, when we do service of devotional, we call it devotional service, this path of bhakti yoga. Yoga means devotion to God. We don't do it to, our goal is not to do it to get something back. Of course, we all want to be free from our material condition. We want to go back home, back to the spiritual world. So that, you know, we're doing it also for that reason, but we're not doing it to get some, you know, praise, or, you know, I want to perform this service because I want devotees to pat me on the back and say, oh, you're so good. You know, we're trying to purify our true motives, which is simply just out of love for Krishna. And we're trying to develop that love. We're not in that pure stage, of course, but we're aspiring. And, you know, and giving in charity, look, I still think one can be discriminating, but I kind of try to see those, to give those two different examples where we've got in the Bhagavad Gita, where in chapter 17, where it's the very definite descriptions of the different kinds of charity. And then there's that example of Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya, and how his, and his spiritual master, how they showed that compassion. So it's not like cut and dried, and it's like one thing and that's all you follow. You have to use your common sense, you have to use your intelligence and time, place and circumstance. Thanks. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for a very nice class. Thought into it. Living in India so long, you get exposed to a lot of beggars, and I did discriminate with them because I could see that a lot of that was intoxication, and some were actually just give the money to someone else, so they just the puppet. In the end, I used to take the shaman, and that way I'd give food, and that way it's still giving, it's still nourishing them spiritually and materially, and I found that was a good practice for me. And just wondering why I was just doing the Harinam on Sunday, there was two elderly men begging, one in a can and one with a hat, and they were just, obviously in need. And I never thought of giving anything. I did have a purse on me, but I just thought, oh, I'm Harinam, I have to give, and I thought it was weird that they're begging. But some people are in need, but then I was thinking of maybe next time we do need to carry the shaman away so we can give to others.
That's an absolutely brilliant solution, because you're actually giving something that will purify them, because it's prasadam. So that's a really good idea. Whenever I go to India, who knows when that will be next, but have some dried, like some dried cookies or something. And
I don't do that. Once the maha dried cookies, once I gave those, and the lady was up, she couldn't eat it, she just spat it out.
Oh.
So I don't know, when I cook sometimes I have leftovers, so I make up a nice sort of plate and put it in a container.
But I like that idea. It's a very nice idea. All right, thank you everyone for listening. Jai. Glory to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.